tonight is the driving beat of the world. The word down here on the streets tonight is the true.
Safety is good stuff, but I love the excitement of jaywalking. Besides, crosswalks are for sheeple, the bleeding, grazing follower types, aspiring to little more in life than being led about and told what to do. The poor souls who step up to intersections, push the little silver button, and wait for their standard, perfectly predictable, and fully automated permission signal. Only when the grand design grants them authorization do they venture forth. They have a willingness to live strictly with and well within the expectations of others by taking seriously all manner of advice, regulations, human and divine law. And they value and crave predictability. It's a burden I do not share. I understand traffic laws. They help people get to their jobs, meetings, and appointments. But I perpetually hear the siren call of cool and interesting things happening down the alley a few blocks over. Sometimes I look a couple of blocks in both directions, do some quick physics calculations, and step off the curb in the middle of the block. The first time was exhilarating. I dodged family sedans full of youngish suburbanites with their children, pets, and groceries. With shaking fists and fingers, they honked and yelled. Devout sheeple resent the shit out of jaywalkers. The summer I finished my accounting degree, my dad was getting more excited about the interview every day. This I knew because he mentioned it with a grin morning, noon, and night. Some friend of his had a daughter somewhere in Walmart's home office, so Dad called in a favor to get me on a list of interviewees. When the big day finally came, I put on my navy blue suit, got in my car, and drove for hours. But I never went anywhere near that building or that meeting. No matter how hard I tried, I could not reconcile the idea of assigning myself to the growing swarm of drones in the grand hive of American capitalism in glamorous Bentonville, Arkansas. For a month, I honestly considered going through with it. Maybe I could work there for a while just to please my folks. But I was so sick and tired of acquiescence and the business types that I couldn't even show up to talk about it. When he finally calmed down enough to speak to me again, he said I made him out to be a fool. I never meant to hurt my father. I was only trying to survive, and I was sure he could never understand that. I moved out of their farmhouse a few days later, carrying a change of clothes, leaving behind a few boxes of kid stuff, and another full of accounting textbooks, on top of which rested the red faux leather folio holding a diploma that had come in the mail, proudly presenting me as a completer of a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. That day, and nearly every day since, I looked several blocks in both directions, did some quick physics calculations, stepped from the safety of the sidewalk, and headed straight for the novelty, variety, and unpredictability of the ditch, where, as Neil Young once quipped, it was a rough ride, but I met more interesting people there. This is Scott Sullivan. I'm taking a look at my personal narrative, my multimodal personal narrative called Jaywalking. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process I underwent to produce this thing. I'd have to tell you that this piece was initially narrative driven. I started with the construction of the text. It's a autobiographic piece that focuses primarily on an aspect of human nature, the need for independence and individuation. I used the extended metaphor of jaywalking as an illustration of choosing for yourself in light of, or maybe sometimes in spite of, the expectations of the greater culture, whether that's your family or the entire society, maybe even the school system in my case at times. My second part of the process following the construction of the text was consideration of the musical pieces I wanted to use. During a long commute, I listened to lots and lots of music, and during the construction of the text, I would take a break and drive and have the opportunity to listen to several pieces. And so I made a list during my drive time of pieces that would probably work well. So I ended up with three that I put in sequence that I think work pretty well thematically. The third part of my process involved the selection of images to go along with the text. I chose them to correspond with keywords in the text. I was very specific in choosing rather mild transitions, but to me a more interesting transition is the one from black and white to color at a particular pivotal point in the narrative. I wanted to represent change of understanding by way of changing from black and white to color. The transitions between the frames I wanted to be very, very easy. The motion, the slight panning motion, I wanted that to be rather casual. I didn't want a lot of shocking or jarring concepts. It was a slowly developing concept in life. I wanted it to represent that way visually as well, and I think it's fairly successful with that. I did choose some sound effects to go on this piece. The initial ones, the sheep sounds early on, and the mention of the term sheeple, were for comic effect, a little bit of lightheartedness. Following that, I did choose some fairly disturbing sound effects to increase dramatic tension. I had car sounds as well as human screaming without revealing the sources to create a sense of intrigue. I'm going to use this piece to introduce myself to my colleagues. I'm going to use it also as an invitation for my colleagues to create their own personal multimodal narratives, and I'm going to parlay that. I will edit this. There's some elements in this that won't be appropriate for my classroom. I will do some editing and use it with my kids as an invitation as well. It's been a great project. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I will probably hear these songs in my sleep for the next week, and I can hardly wait for that to end. Thanks for taking a look at my film. Before I go, I did want to mention several years working in physical labor, and that was my experience that the people are far more interesting than the ones in the accounting department at the University of Arkansas.